So, three things have happened almost simultaneously, which has made me decide that I do want to talk about this topic and give a fairly unpopular opinion. One that I've expressed often privately, but not really on this channel, not really quote unquote publicly in the context of a guitar medium. The three things that happened were as follows. Number one, Custom Shop released their latest, which is the Tom Murphy Brazilian Rosewood 1959 reissues for 20,000 US dollars a pop. That's number one. Number two, Epiphone released their Greeny, the latest Greeny. I mean, if there's a contest for the most bastardized guitar alive, it probably is the Greeny. So there's an Epiphone Greeny now for the princely sum of 1,500 US dollars. And thirdly, very accidentally, I discovered, I think they're called Maneskin. I don't know what they pronounced, but this Italian rock band, I discovered them for the first time, and it does relate to the first two things. And actually, it was the third thing that made me decide to make this video. Gibson, if there is a company, if there's an entity that has both helped contribute and really is responsible to some extent to the entire spirit of rock and roll, that's on one side. On the other hand, if there's a company that's completely exploited rock and roll, the term, rock and roll, the feeling, rock and roll, the state of mind for commercial gain in a way that is completely antithetical to what rock and roll meant in the first place, I think it has to be Gibson. I am a Gibson fan. I have multiple Gibson guitars, but for me, it is very surprising that no one is really saying this, and I think I have to say it. Gibson has been making subtle variations of the Sunburst Les Paul, and by making relatively far-fetched associations with famous artists, maybe it's a slight difference in the way the Sunburst is shaded. I had a camera error. Clearly, even the camera doesn't like what I have to say. So I'll just repeat myself. By making very small variations of the quote unquote 59 Les Paul standard, or just a Gibson Les Paul, the same guitar, small variations, slightly different ways in which the sunburst has been applied, slightly different ways in terms of damaging / aging the guitar, slightly different ways, differences in profile. None of these are significant differences by any means. But because they are associated with an artist, Greeny being a good example, because the color is just the right shade of lemon, because the wire, cheap $2 wire, is just wired in the wrong way, suddenly it gives it a regular guitar, which is actually not even made from the same material that was made in the 90s, in 1959, suddenly gets a mythical association with an artist, and you can sticker on a significant amount of money because that association with that artist helps some people feel more rock and roll in some sort of way. For me, the reason I have 80 guitars but I don't have a single Gibson 1959 reissue is simple. I have a Les Paul standard. I have a very nice Epiphone Les Paul standard. I see no merit in try to replicate a guitar from 1959, which is significant, primarily so because of what it was played on. But in fact, the copy that you're making, the replica that you're making, isn't even the same guitar because the material is not the same. I mean, all the R9s have Indian rosewood, right? The fact that it has Brazilian rosewood, which was what 1959 had, is amazing. Is what's making them charge even like double for that one. So for me, the whole idea of a 1959 R9 has been a ridiculous one, which is why I've never gotten one. And the idea of all the collector choices, which are basically R9s, slightly different color, slightly different, very small variations are, and yet some of them command astronomical values on the second-hand market. I just can't relate. I do not participate. And I find it quite ridiculous. For some other guitar makers, I get it, right? If I look at, say, a ESP or a PRS or even a Fender, there are significant differences in material that you get. Now, you could argue whether those differences are worth it, whether a slightly more beautiful piece of wood is worth so many X $100, $1,000. That's a fair argument to make, but there is a difference. Slightly different shading because the artist that way, it's just for me has been one ridiculous exercise in, and which gets me to the heart of the matter, right? Rock and roll existed. It was amazing. It was crazy, and it was something that had never happened before. And it's gone in a sense, as in the first movement, the 60s, the times like bands like Cream, Jimi Hendrix, Led Zeppelin in the 70s. It's gone, done and dusted with. Maybe even Guns N' Roses in the 80s. I understand that it was a lot of it was a special time. I love that music as well. I do not switch on contemporary radio at all. So I choose to listen to that music as well. But to to basically cough up large sums of money because a guitar that you're buying is kind of similar to something one of those idols played. I understand if you're paying a lot of money for your idol's guitar, there is a certain ineffable thing about memorabilia across categories, not just guitars and rock and roll. I understand that if it's the actual guitar and you're coughing up money and people do, I understand it. I mean, I wouldn't do it personally, but I understand it. But a poor copy, and I do call it a poor copy because guitars are very individual things. You can never have an exact copy. You can maybe have something that is kind of similar, but the wood grain will always be different. And as I told you, with the entire R9 project, they aren't always the same because woods are different as well. And plastics are different. I mean, it's a wonderful marketing spin for them. Every time you just get, the plastics are a bit more accurate, whatever. Trying to recreate the spirit of rock and roll or feel the spirit of rock and roll and convincing yourself that this guitar is the best thing ever because it's kind of a poor copy of a famous person's guitar is, for me, a stupid exercise. And then the best part is when they actually make it slightly closer by using the correct material and charge a huge number. It's and it's again celebrated. Oh wow, it's gotten even closer. So for me, I understand why Gibson does it as a capitalist, as a person trying to further the company's bottom line. It is a very effective short-term strategy. You have a bunch of people of a certain age with a certain disposable income who are trying to relive a certain time in their lives, and this is the best way for the company to, I would have to say, a little bit exploit that. That's what they do. They are perhaps not that forward-looking in terms of looking to the future and looking at where rock and roll really lies. And that is where, if you look at something like Maneskin, right? So, Maneskin, sorry, my apologies, I'm going to butcher them. I should have checked what their pronunciation was. Now, that is rock and roll. And the way I define it is, of course, it's guitar-based, which is important. There's been some people who have been saying that hip-hop or certain other artists are the new rock and roll. I disagree with that. Rock and roll is also about a certain bit of anti-establishment, a certain bit of pushing the boundaries. If you've seen Maneskin's Instagram account, you will realize they do push the boundaries. They're a little bit like a mainstream version almost of another band, which is very punk, very rock and roll, called Wargasm. So that is rock and roll, right? And Gibson has actually no part in it. Gibson is busy making a lot of money out of people who are stuck in the 60s and 70s and 80s. I'm one of them. I'm also stuck in the 60s, 70s, and 80s. But, this is where rock and roll is. And even for people who are just arguing till the end of the days on the keyboards about how the Gibsons are the best and then PRS is crap or ESP or whatever is not that great. It's all about Gibson, the perfect Les Paul. I think if you like the guitar, it works for you, that's brilliant. Everybody can wear whatever they want, play whatever they want. But if it's for capturing some of that rock and roll magic, just sit back and think about what does rock and roll really mean? Right? It doesn't mean this. It doesn't mean that there was a guitar, it was played by a very famous person, then it was played by another very famous person, one of my favorite guitarists, Gary Moore. The guy died, had to sell it because he didn't have enough money. I mean, look, if only they had done this entire Greeny bit when he was alive. But they couldn't have, right? Because the whole story of Greeny comes because he's dead now. And then, what an exploited guitar. First, of course, Hammett bought it again, big Metallica fan here. That was great. But then, okay, they made some copies of the Greeny bit. I was already kind of raising my eyebrows, but I get it. Gibson makes copies, though, of course, these are not the same thing. These are poor copies because they can never be the same thing. And then that was, I think, $50,000 for the ticket plus the original guitar, which I thought was crazy, but Gibson got away with it. So then they went, okay, let's make a regular version of it. Then let's make a Gibson version of it. Now let's make an Epiphone version of it. And for small changes, the Epiphone version is an Epiphone Les Paul. The difference are the humbuckers and the headstock, what am I saying? The headstock shape. For that, let's charge like 40% extra. Don't quote me on the exact numbers. I'm giving approximations here, but these numbers are significant. And people are biting. So I guess I'm an exception over here. But I just think that, guys, if you want a good Les Paul, buy a regular Les Paul. You don't have to pay through the roof for some way to live up or to capture the rock and roll spirit. Sorry, just because the guitar is colored a little bit more like a rock and roll Idol's guitar, or just has the right wiring, slight difference in wiring, which a tech can do for you for $20. That is not taking you in any way closer to Gary Moore. What's getting you closer to Gary Moore potentially is listening to more of his music, learning to play vibratos, going from first gear to sixth gear like he does. Right? So don't buy into this crap. That's my opinion. Pretty rich coming from someone who's got so many guitars, but the Gibson custom shop thing, and I just feel the bastardization of rock and roll. I've not kept this to myself. I've told my other guitarist friends about it, but I think just the combination of seeing that Brazilian Rosewood run for $20,000 and listening to Maneskin on this Maneskin on the same day, I think I had to express this opinion. All right, till next time.